Hello and welcome to this video on using roses as a species in bonsai. The roses seen in gardens, displays and rubbish bins on the 15th of February are not the first species that comes to mind for many people as bonsai. As a garden specimen, they are often trained into a dense clump of foliage and flowers, with little consideration given to the structure under the leaves. The garden variety can come as a clump similar to the multi-trunk styles, as a climbing vine like a rose, or a lollipop. They are also cut back to very few branches each year. Any attempt at bonsai of a rose is definitely not beginner friendly, but is an opportunity to learn many lessons in a memorable way. As a bonsai, the rose is a different creature to that seen in your garden in many ways. The rose is well manicured, has a specific form, and the focus shifts from the form to the flowers and then branch structure throughout the year. This includes both standard, cabbage, and miniature rose. The miniature rose is a good example as it has tiny flowers that bloom prolifically. It only grows to a very small height of a little under 30 centimeters. It has very bright leaves and a compact habit of growth. Many of the current varieties are disease resistant and have been developed for that. Similar work has been done on ensuring the flowers and leaves scale appropriately. This means when in full bloom, it is properly balanced and looks appropriate for its size. This magnifies the impact. The miniature rose will also flower right through from spring through to autumn. This ensures nearly 9 months of constant colour. It can be kept indoors for large parts of this time, giving you constant colourful displays. The inevitable trade-off for such a delightful and long-lasting display is that the tree needs to be protected from harsh weather in winter. This generally means putting it in a protected environment. Most roses come from temperate climates in the first place, and this is why they need to be cared for in winter. When you bring a plant from a warm climate like Asia and try to grow them somewhere else, they always have trouble. Many of the rose plants available now are grafted onto stronger, more resilient rootstock. Older, more established plants in a garden may not be grafted. This means that the plants that are grown now, and ones you may have access to, have a rootstock that can cope with just about anything you will put it through. What you need to be concerned about is how well the rose itself will survive. Most roses growing in a garden will need lots of direct sunlight. The standard rose will also need to be staked, as we will need to do for some climbing roses. This is because they have no strength to hold themselves up and will often grow top heavy. Depending on when you are able to gain your rose, there are several possible appearances you could start with. The best case scenario is what you see here, one in which you have a thick trunk for your rose. This can then be tapered or worked on to create a more standard basis for future work as a bonsai. The second scenario is one in which you have constant width from top to bottom of your trunk. Then it suddenly flares out, almost like reverse taper, but most of the trunk is consistent. This is a common concern with standard roses. It is harder to correct, but can be done by repotting every other year, cutting the rose back to much closer to its base, and using sacrifice branches. Finally, there is the multi-trunk form, which starts in a sort of crown. Each trunk is tiny and almost useless as a bonsai. This sort of rose is suitable for slow work, or those who can cut it back hard and regularly. Most of the trunks that you try to keep will not thicken, but you might be able to develop some taper and form to those that you retain. It will be hard as you need to almost treat it like a forest, but it can be done. The ideal candidate is a miniature rose, which ramifies and scales extremely well. It is also relatively resilient so long as you take due care. No matter what you get or what species you are going with, it needs to be planted into a soil that drains well, but it also has to hold on to enough moisture for the roots to absorb it, just as you would any other bonsai. The difference is roses have a quirky taste in soil. They like it alkaline or basic. This is similar in some respects to azaleas, and you could think of the two as needing similar soil requirements. Adding a little bit of lime or calcium will normally give it enough of a kick to grow quite happily. Watering of the rose should not be in any way considered different to another bonsai. Water when dry, or you're concerned the soil might become dry. Ensure it's never completely dry and has a little bit of moisture present. Depending on where you are and when, this could vary, but follows the general pattern of several times a week in spring, daily in summer, decreasing in autumn, and ceasing in winter. During spring and summer, you will need to fertilize each rose regularly. During the growing and flowering seasons, the bonsai rose will have periods of prolific growth. This includes the leaves, branches, and flowers. In order to support this growth, you need to fertilize regularly. As the tree is dormant in winter, mostly, you should decrease or cease any fertilizer use. Most of the older styles of rose would also have their work done in winter. Pruning, shari, and jin are done in this time, preferably closer to the start of spring. This ensures that the older growth is removed in time for new growth to come back. The important part is not to remove all of the old growth. Most of the roses in gardens follow a pattern of only developing flowers on established branches, that is last year's growth. Some of them go a little further back and require 2 years of growth. This makes it hard to ensure that your bonsai will flower every year on every branch. Depending on how you are going to try and train your rose, you may only be removing those branches that are weak or that have already flowered. You can also try to prune lightly to maintain a silhouette. This reduces branch length, ensuring that you still have some display of flowers. You can also prune any spent flower stems. This takes energy away from those buds and instead puts it into new growth or new flowers. This creates the right environment for a short-lived display on new or second-year growth. That is much better than if you had not removed any of the spent flowers. This is a process called deadheading. It can also be done for aesthetic purposes if you do not want to have the dead flowers on your tree. Wiring is another difficult area with roses. Other than the obvious problem with thorns, the branches are often not pliable enough to be bent easily. This brittleness is why they break or tear. This creates dieback, which can be very pronounced. The second problem is large lengths between nodes. The branches can grow a long way apart, which makes proper spacing and scaling a nightmare. Finally, the unpredictable nature of where and when branches will grow. In some species, they will grow from any point. In others, only from past leaf or flower nodes. You need to know what your species is and how it behaves to get some idea of where branches might show up. As a further complication, the branches also gain very little in size without the use of a sacrifice branch or many. This may take years to reach a point where you are happy with the ratio of the size of your lower branches to those higher up on your tree. Positioning is another concern. As said, the miniature rose bonsai requires care and attention in winter, but they are not a houseplant either. As with any bonsai, it should be kept outside in semi-shade for most of the year. Even in winter, it's better to move it into a protected environment outside than it is to move it inside. In spring and summer, the rose needs to be outside. The natural light is a necessary means to support all of the growth that is going on. The rose is a specimen that, with extra growth like this, will need regular repotting. It's likely to occur every 2 years initially, and then gradually growing longer in intermission as the tree gets older. Over the lifetime of a rose, it is subject to several diseases, the most important of which are fungal. These primarily affect the leaves, which reduces the overall health of the tree. Fortunately, they are all cleared with the use of a fungicidal spray or systemic treatment. Aesthetically, the bigger problem is aphids. They damage the leaves and flowers. They can be dealt with using any standard pesticide or developing a garden that is conducive to their eradication. In short, if your tree survives both the difficulty in training it, the rough treatment it will get, and you find that it is pleasing to look at, the rose can be a very nice bonsai. It's just very hard to work with. It's a lot more variable than many standard species used in bonsai. It's also, in many respects, a lot more hassle. Getting something that is well sized early on and keeping it alive long enough to use as a bonsai is another hassle. The tree that's been in the background here has been trained for 2 years just to get to this point, as it's had many periods of dieback, extreme growth, and had to be repotted several times. Gradually, it's getting to a point where at least 3 of the branches will work. There may even be a new top to the tree soon, depending on how the next growing season is. It might also die back unexpectedly, and all that work will have been for nothing. With a movement away from many of these sorts of plants in gardens, and many being landscaped, you might be able to source one for free or very little cost quite easily, and they are interesting to play with. They just aren't a standard and easily trained bonsai specimen. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.